My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality-Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life.
Dan, a common question we get all the time is what should I actually be investing in within my retirement plan? I know that looks different for everyone, but sometimes people think there is just one specific golden fund that's going to be out there that's just going to accomplish all their retirement needs. So, what do you say to that?
Well, it is actually one of the most common questions that we get in our meetings. And, it's not that hard for us to answer this, to be honest, because even though everyone is different, a lot of times that has more to do with their contributions and what type of contributions and things like that. Because when we're talking about investing inside of a company retirement plan, we do have a specific goal. We know that we're planning to retire someday, and the investments are simply tools that help us accomplish those goals. So when we start to think about investments like tools, it gets easier to make these types of decisions. So, for example, stocks, and of course, there's lots of different kinds of stocks, but every 401k plan is going to have a variety of different types of stock funds to choose from. Stocks are just a great tool for growing money over long periods of time. So if I'm in my 20s or my 30s and maybe retirement's far off in the distance, we're almost always going to recommend a diversified portfolio with 100% stock positions during that time period. It's just the best tool for growing money over long periods of time, regardless of the fact that sometimes your accounts are going to be negative for some period of time. So that part of it, works pretty easy. Then we start to get closer to retirement. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit more challenging and more dependent on your goal. So when you start to get within about 10 to 15 years of your retirement goal, that's a general guideline. It depends on your balance and how much you're contributing. But about 10 to 15 years before your goal, we enter into what we refer to as the transition phase of investing. So when you were younger, pure accumulation phase of investing. Now you're going to start to transition your way from that pure accumulation mode to this date of retirement that you're shooting for in the future. Now, at retirement, we call that the income mode. Your investments, you're no longer saving for retirement. You're actually thinking about how you're going to take money out. But during that income phase, we start to incorporate bonds. Okay, so bonds, not a great tool for growing money over long periods of time, much better tool at preserving what you work so hard to save over shorter periods of time. In retirement, bonds buy time for your stocks to do their job. That's what they are as a tool. So the transition from accumulation to income, that 10 to 15 year time period, you're typically slowly and methodically in a disciplined way moving some of what you saved from stocks over towards bonds. Now, a lot of times people talk to us about their default option might be a target date fund or some sort of like your employer plan has a canned option that just does it for you. The target date fund during transition is an awesome solution because it does actually slowly transition you more conservative as you get closer to the date of when you plan to retire. But I don't like target date funds early when you're saving when you're younger because they almost always have some part of bond position. They might have 10% or 15% bonds, even when you're in your 20s and 30s. So you don't need that at that age. Now, when you get to retirement, now everything's off the table because this completely depends on how do you plan to take income, how are you going to use these different resources, and now the services of a financial advisor become much more impactful than it is during the accumulation phase.
And I just want to say for someone who may not know whether or not they're invested in a target date fund right now. Typically on your statement, or if you log in online and look at your investments, it'll say target retirement or it may say target date, and it'll always have a year. So that year is associated with when you will turn 65 typically, or around that 65 number. So you'll always see a year with it. And then that's the way that you can know that you are in a target date fund. I want to go back to what you said about investing in a 100% stock portfolio. Is this something that you recommend people choose those investments on their own? Do you typically recommend they just go with some type of index fund within that? If they have that option, what do you suggest there?
Yeah, it's a good question because, frankly, the accumulation phase of investing is pretty simple. You don't need an advisor for the most part during the accumulation phase of investing. It can be as simple as having a couple of different broad-based index funds. If your plan happens to include like a total stock market index fund and then maybe a total international stock market index fund, you can make a decent stock allocation out of just a couple of different broad-based index funds. Now, some 401ks that we see, every 401k menu is different. So some of them don't have those types of options. And now it might get a little bit more challenging where you're piecing together three or four or five different funds in order to have a true broadly diversified portfolio. So it's hard for us to talk about every plan because they are all designed differently. The idea is to have parts of different elements of the stock market. So you want to think in terms of having some large companies, mid-sized companies, smaller companies. You want to have domestic US types of stocks. You want to have international. And so when you piece that all together, sometimes that's very easy inside of a plan. And some of the plans we review, it's a little bit more complicated. Now, under our group advisory agreements, where we are very familiar with the menu of fund options, we easily put together like sample portfolios of what we would recommend at different ages and different goals and different things like that. And now you get that detailed information you need to pick the funds that make sense for your situation.
Well, that is definitely true, and it has been beneficial for many of our nurses that we meet with. I know that they often come in not knowing what they should be doing with their portfolio, and just to be able to provide that direction has been helpful. Now, if someone is like, you know what, I still don't understand, I don't want to get my hands messy, I don't want to, try to put together things, is being in the default option okay?
Yeah, so there are a lot of advisors that don't like target date funds. They you'll if you go online, you'll see that they badmouth them and whatever. We look at that and we go, okay, hold on a second. Like if somebody really doesn't want to take interest in this and they just don't have any resources to be able to like help guide them through that selection, a target date fund is by its very nature going to be well diversified. It's going to rebalance. It's going to get more conservative as you get closer to your target date automatically. And so it is not a bad thing if you just stay in that default option of the target date fund. Now, from our perspective, if somebody's willing to take some relatively simple actions, we usually want you to opt out of the target date fund when you are younger, 20, 30, 35 years away from retirement. We want you to opt out of the target date fund to avoid that small amount of bonds that they automatically have. And that just removes a little bit of friction on your potential returns as you think about long-term, performance. But if somebody just says, hey, I don't even want to deal with it, and they stay in the target date fund, it's not the end of the world.
Well, thank you so much for this information. I do hope that it helps someone. This is a question we get frequently, so hopefully this addresses some of those concerns. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's really just speaking in terms of our large group advisory agreements, where it helps these people so much because when you first start with an employer, you're overwhelmed with all sorts of changes. You know, you have new benefits, you have a new job, you have to get used to all the new protocols of what's going on. And they might hit you with some of your benefits, you know, very briefly, and it might kind of be off to the side. And you go, I just don't want to deal with that right now. Our group advisory agreements give people the ability to come and see us, knowing that we know pretty much everything there is to know about their benefits, their 401k, and we can very quickly and easily get them into their plan with an appropriate allocation. And now it's set in stone typically for quite a long time, so they don't have to worry about it all the time.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for adding that point. The group advisory program that has definitely helped thousands of nurses, and it's definitely been able to set people on the right track. Well, until next time, thank you.
Thanks, Leah.
Have a good one.